It's Tuesday, April 16th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do that is Jordan Vanek of Rotogrinders. Jordan, what's going on, buddy?
Going well, man. It's been a good off season. I've taken a few breaks looking at some college football depth charts recently, but I'm glad to get back into the draft as we're 10 days away from it.
Dude, we are rapidly approaching the NFL draft. I don't know how you feel about that. I feel like I'd love the draft to just be here because if we're going to be honest, I love the post-draft analysis of players more than I do. You know, about 100 people want me to do their show like pre-draft, like squeeze me in, you know, before the draft to talk receivers, and then it's crickets the week after. I'm like, no, man, I want to actually talk about the post-draft fits. That's what I really love. At the same time, though, I kind of need like 10 more days to get eyes on as many prospects as possible. I don't know if you saw this, but Peter Schrager put out his first mock draft. I think he only does one usually before the NFL draft. He put it out today. He has Jalen Polk going in the first round to the damn Chiefs, and I haven't charted Jalen Polk yet. So I'm like, we got a three-car alarm fire, whatever the expression is. We're freaking out over here in Harmon headquarters because we don't have the Jalen Polk profile ready. So at the same time, Jordan, I do also want there to be more time before the draft, but it is rapidly approaching.
Yeah, no, the Jalen Polk hype, I'm not there. I don't love Jalen Polk. I think if Jalen McMillan never injures his hamstring, I think Polk would have stayed back another year in college personally, but saw that. I'm now going to reevaluate because obviously he's hearing something from probably Kansas City. Obviously, he's the man with a Super Bowl prediction, so hopefully he's nailing some of the mock draft picks.
Yes, let's hope so. Jordan, you're currently working at Rotogrinders. You were at the 33rd team prior to that. Let the people know what you've been working on lately, just this offseason. Like you said, you've got some projects coming up here specifically with college football.
Yeah, I've been working on just diving into some of the college data from depth chart analysis to a lot of these receivers. But actually watching some of the true freshmen coming in. I know we have an excellent receiver class in this 2024 draft, but I will say, Matt, that whatever 2027, 2028, some of these kids are unbelievable. I know that's a little far for you. I know you got Jalen Polk to worry about. There's a kid at Ohio State that reminds me of freshman Julio Jones. Like, unbelievably talented kid.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Listen, that's the funny thing when people ask me this year, like, man, this receiver class is so good. I'm like, dude, the last four classes have been so good. And like the next four classes are going to be so good. So normally right around now, Jordan, I'd feel like I'd have enough eyes on the amount of prospects I kind of normally want to have. I don't feel like that this year. And I feel like that's just going to be the new normal. So I would love to sit here and talk about future freshman wide receivers with you. But that's not what we're doing on this show necessarily today, although we will get to plenty of wide receiver talk because we are continuing our teams that will shape the draft series on the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. Today, we are looking at the teams that have 10 plus picks in this year's NFL draft. And by the way, a lot of those teams are very good. So the players that they add are going to be fantasy relevant. They're going to be relevant in the playoff discussion. We're talking Buffalo Bills. We're talking Cincinnati Bengals. We're talking about the Green Bay Packers, the LA Rams, and the San Francisco 49ers. We won't touch as much on the Cardinals, even though they qualify for this discussion, just because we did break them down with Robert Mays a few episodes ago on the teams in the top 10 that don't need a quarterback episode. So if you want more Cardinals analysis, we'll touch on them, but go dive into that conversation with Robert Mays in depth. But before we do that, Jordan, just one piece of news that we need to catch up on, and it is wide receiver related, which is why I, just gratuitously threw it on the outline here. Devonta Smith, Eagles wide receiver, signed a 3-year, $75 million contract extension that includes $51 million guaranteed. Now, this contract is a little funny because it's, $25 million per year, but some of that is including his 5th-year option, which they just tacked this deal onto the end of that. But I think some people, Jordan, were a little surprised to see Devonta Smith get this deal for this number and for really at this timing, which we can talk about here in a second. But what was your reaction when you saw Devonta Smith sign this new contract?
So for starters, he's worth every penny. Devonta Smith, to me, is one of the top tier route runners in the league, one of the top tier separators in the NFL. It's just the offense in Philly doesn't necessarily feature him. It's the quarterback play doesn't exactly match up with it, but Howie Roseman is getting ahead of the contracts. We're still going to see Justin Jefferson get paid, Jamar Chase, and ironically, CD Lamb for the Dallas Cowboys. It kind of puts the pressure on Dallas of like, hey, you got to pay your guy now. You haven't really made any moves this offseason. And Howie Roseman's like, oh, I'm going to get ahead of a player that wasn't in his draft class, that got drafted later, and pay him before you pay your top tier receiver. So it's Howie Roseman making chess moves while other people are playing checkers.
Yeah, I love that the Eagles always hand their homework in early, where teams like the Cowboys wait to the last minute. They're cramming for the test at the final minute when it comes to contract extensions. I do agree with you that it's smart to get this done now. That was my first reaction, because this was not on my radar because we have so many receivers up for deals. The Brandon Ayuk saga rolls on. Does he follow the 49ers on Instagram, or where are we at with the social media following stuff? We know Justin Jefferson is up for a contract extension, and then CeeDee Lamb and his agent, everybody basically says they're just like, yeah, we'll wait to see what Justin Jefferson signs before we put pen to paper on a new deal, which I think makes sense. So Devonta Smith kind of comes out of nowhere, but yeah, whatever you think about Devonta Smith's contract right now, you think he's overpaid at $25 million a year, which I'm with you, Jordan. I don't think he's overpaid at $25 million a year. Michael Pittman signed it for 23. Calvin Ridley signed it for 23. Like, Devonta Smith is better than both of those players. And I like Michael Pittman and Calvin Ridley, but Devonta Smith is just a tier above those guys, in my personal opinion. You think he's overpaid at that number? Wait till you see what those guys sign for, okay? And they're going to get way more than that. They're going to get real $30 million per year numbers. That is going to happen, and it's just that's the receiver market, man. So I'm curious. We agree this contract is worth it. I think we both agree. Well, I'll ask you this, because I'll put it to you this way. I think when you look at the number 2 receivers in the NFL, quote, number 2 receivers, if you want to call them 1B receivers, whatever, that's fine. I've been moving away from the 1B term because, Jordan, the second letter in the alphabet is B. So you're essentially saying number 2, even if we think you could be a number 1 on another team. And which my point in that is, I think when you look at all those guys, the T. Higgins, the Jalen Waddles, in my opinion, Deebo Samuel to Brandon Ayuk at San Francisco, the guy that I actually think could be the best one on another team is Devonta Smith. But from a fantasy perspective, Jordan, I do think is very sensitive to the kind of volatility that archetype brings. And I'm obsessed with talking about this because I think the most disappointing group in fantasy last year was this bucket of players that we're talking about right now. Deebo Samuel notwithstanding, because again, that's kind of a different offense, different situation, but Jalen Waddle didn't hit ADP expectations. Devonta Smith did not. T. Higgins, injuries, but even when he and Burrow were on the field together, there was some volatility there. So am I wrong in feeling that this guy has the best talent to be, he's the best player of this kind of archetype, but he also might be, because of the offense he plays in, the most susceptible to fantasy volatility?
Oh, yeah, definitely. He's, to me, if you flip Garrett Wilson and him, where Garrett Wilson's been going with Aaron Rodgers now in the top 12, or even flip him a Chris Olave, where again, 2 guys that get drafted ahead of him, he's just as talented, if not better, than both of those players. And they're all kind of in the same group of not necessarily built like the old school alphas, but play just exceptional football because they're just great separators. It just comes down to Philly with Saquon and Jalen Hurts, so you're not getting any real red zone usage out of him. And then even when you're throwing in the red zone, AJ Brown. AJ Brown is just a guy that's going to dominate the ball. And we saw that stretch of games where he went 6 straight games with over 125 yards this past season. There's some real reasons why he's not performing on a fantasy level. Well, if he flipped teams, he could have that Stefon Diggs outbreak where you see him go from a situation where he's kind of 1A, 1B to being the alpha and then getting 150 targets a year. It's just going to be, is it going to happen now that he's paid? It's probably not coming anytime soon.
Yeah, it really has nothing to do with him as a player, because I'm with you. He is pretty, I'm not going to say flawless, but he just is so good as a route runner and a separator that, and rather sneakily, a lot of the times in this particular, I can't wait to see what they do with these receivers this year, because they signed Devontae Parker. I can't imagine that Parker is going to really be a big needle mover for them, but he is a pure X receiver. At times they've had Devonta Smith be the guy to line up as their X, and then AJ Brown's been that movable chess piece for them where they could put him off the ball, they could put him in the slot. I mean, if Parker is their third receiver, he again has to line up at X. Does that allow Smith to move into the slot, move into the flanker position? Because rather quietly, he's been that guy lining up at that position for the Eagles, at least in 22 especially, and a little bit in 23 as well. Or do they take a guy on day 2 or day 3 of the draft? I think they need a third receiver here, so which again, just more volatility. So he's an interesting player to discuss, but I'm glad because I respect your opinion on wide receivers that you're kind of the same kind of wavelength with me here, which is very, very good player and very much deserving of this contract.
Definitely.
All right, let's move into our teams that will shape the draft conversation. And let's start with the Buffalo Bills. They're certainly the newsiest of these teams, I think, this offseason because of the Stefon Diggs trade. My central theme of the offseason for the Buffalo Bills, Jordan, is a new look operation around Josh Allen. Like the Bills of old, what we've known from this team, like that's kind of gone at this point. A lot of defensive stalwarts have moved on. Von Miller's still kicking around there, but I wouldn't say he's been a stalwart defensive player for them since signing that contract. Steph Diggs is gone. Gabe Davis is gone. A lot of new faces on offense, and I think there will be more new faces on this offense come the end of the NFL draft. That is pretty much a lock. Like I said, they have 10 plus picks in this draft. And they have big needs on offense and on defense. So where do we stand with the Bills as we head into the draft here, Jordan?
Yeah, I look at their roster, and this is the most important draft that their general manager has been in. The first one was when he picked, obviously, Josh Allen and Jermaine Edmonds. He even casually stayed at like some of those picks and didn't have to move up pre-draft, and actually kept 2 first-round picks for that one, which was huge for him. But now it's, you just got rid of Diggs. You still got your quarterback that's capable of taking you to the Super Bowl. Can you nail down these first few rounds to get him a true weapon, someone that's going to, do the things that they need to do? But again, it's a rookie wide receiver. I know we've been blessed with the Jamar Chases and the Justin Jeffersons, but that's not the case for every rookie receiver. And then also Joe Brady's offseason. What offense are you going to build? Like with when he was with Carolina, I was excited when we signed him, came over from LSU. Then DJ Moore was out targeted by Robbie Anderson. Like that actually happened with Joe Brady. So what is his real plan coming into the offseason? That's going to be a big thing for me with the Bills, is what type of offense are they going to try to, emulate? And again, they have Dalton Kincaid. I think he's probably going to lead this team in targets. I think he's an exceptional receiving tight end, but is it Joe Brady going to be the one that actually gets it out of Dalton Kincaid? I don't know if that's going to be the case.
It's funny that you bring up the Joe Brady thing, because I overall, like, if just you remove the players and their resumes and all that, I overall like what Joe Brady did as the Carolina Panthers offensive coordinator. And I was having this conversation with somebody in my Discord about this, because they were bringing up a Scott Barrett tweet where he said he talked to an insider, a high-ranking NFL insider, and the biggest criticism around the league is that Joe Brady doesn't scheme guys open. I actually would disagree with that. I think he does a great job of scheming players open. And like you brought up Robbie Anderson, I thought he did a hell of a job scheming Robbie Anderson open on these, like I said it all year that year with 2020 Carolina Panthers. They were just hunting for like big, like a 40-yard touchdown on a crossing route from Robbie Anderson. They finally got it like in week 11, which who cares, took too long. I think it was like week 11. I have no idea, no memory for this, but I think they did a really good job scheming Robbie Anderson open. It's just like, to your point, do we want to scheme Robbie Anderson open, or do we want to scheme DJ Moore open? Like, I kind of think there's sometimes a misallocation. I certainly think a former Bills receiver who wore number 14 felt like there was a misallocation of the scheme and the targets and all of that stuff. So I'm glad you brought this up, because my general vibe on Brady is positive, but it could, like, maybe that doesn't stand up to the test of actual personnel development and resource allocation.
Yeah, and it's just from a fantasy perspective, like they might be spread and even in targets. Like with Carolina, Curtis Samuel had 1,000 yards all purpose. He had 200 rushing, like 850 receiving. DJ Moore got over 1,000 yards. Robbie Anderson got over 1,000 yards. Teddy Bridgewater was playing quarterback and then got benched for PJ Walker at some point in the season. And then it flipped back to Teddy. Like, Joe Brady dealt with the Matt Rule, David Tepper era. That was a little difficult, but now he's got a lot of pressure because the Bills, they can't feel like they're in a new era. They're going to be rebuilding, but they got to reload because it's the team with Josh Allen. Like, he's got to go for Super Bowls. Like, he can't be a part of like, oh, we're going to develop this year. Like, we're going to have to go and compete with the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's just the sad reality of where he is and where the Bills are as an organization.
Dude, Mike Davis had 1,000 total yards for that 2020 Panthers team. So they got production out of a Teddy Bridgewater-led offense. And I do think that there's a big part of me that thinks some of these players can thrive in certain roles in this offense. Like, I'm a big Curtis Samuel fan. I like what Curtis Samuel brings. I think he is a guy that can win in those gadgety ways, but he can also be a true separator as an outside receiver against man coverage. I also like Khalil Shakir. But look, let's not mince words here. This is not a great receiver room. Even you like Dalton Kincaid. I have kind of my questions about Kincaid if like he can be a high volume player, but they need to add in this wide receiver room. This is not the group it's going to look like in week 1. When you look at the Bills receiver room, Jordan, just pass catchers generally, what's like, give me kind of an example of a player. You don't have to give me a specific player, but we can talk specifics here in a second. Give me just kind of like the ideal type of receiver that they need to complete this room.
They need someone that's a big body dude. I think they need someone that's going to give them yak. Like, those two things are what they should be looking for. Again, with this rookie class, it's perfect. The player that like I personally see them trading up for, if he just slips just enough, is got to be Brian Thomas Jr. Mm-hmm. Like, we've talked on Twitter about him kind of getting put in like a DK Metcalf like route tree early on in his career, which is going to be very productive for the way he's built as a receiver, where it's a lot of curls and goes. Fun fact, Josh Allen, that's the 2 most targeted routes that Josh Allen has basically year in, year out, because teams are terrified of his big, strong arm. And if you add him to this offense, then you're looking at someone I see as just a very big upgrade over Gabe Davis. Obviously, it's not Stefon Diggs. That's not what they're going to be able to replace. It's not going to go the way that the Minnesota trade worked, where they just got Justin Jefferson for Stefon Diggs. But if you add him into this room, then you have like the necessary pieces to be a very productive offense. And a team they face 2 times a year in Miami, that motion that they run, every team in the NFL should be stealing something from it. Whether that's Curtis Samuel in it, Khalil Shakir in it, they have to be using that type of motion with those 2 players to allow Dalton Kincaid to get a little bit more free, Brian Thomas to be a little bit more free, and Curtis Samuel's got the speed to be able to, he's not Tyreek Hill's fast, but he's fast enough to where that motion is going to give teams a difficult challenge ahead of them. And then you open the door with Brian Thomas, that dude, unbelievable. A lot of people talk about him benefiting from Malik Neighbors. I kind of feel like it was the opposite. I feel like the fact of his speed and just down the field threat at LSU opened a lot underneath for Neighbors.
Oh, brother. Number one, yes, I also kind of have that same feeling that there was a not exclusively Malik Neighbors is benefiting from Brian Thomas, but there's a little bit of both going on here. Like, it's not just one or the other. Man, by the way, there's very few things that would make me feel more alive than Curtis Samuel on the cheat motion plays. Okay, so let's just get that on the record. I do think that is a big reason why they signed Curtis Samuel. He obviously played for Joe Brady before. He also he's experienced in the system, and Brady started using those pre-snap motion plays, not the cheat motion necessarily, but a lot more motion once he took over as the offense coordinator. So I think that's kind of Samuel's role on this team. Think of it a little bit like what Jaden Reed was doing with the Packers last year. I think that's kind of they're a little samey in terms of can do the gadget stuff, but are also real wide receivers as well. So that makes sense from a Samuel perspective. And man, like, yeah, look, we talked about it on the Robert Mays pod with the Bills, like, they would be a really fun projection to see them get into the top 10 and take like a Rome Odunze. That might make me feel more alive than the Curtis Samuel motion stuff is Rome Odunze in a Bills uniform. But I think a mild trade up is a little more realistic. And I've been saying, Jordan, that from a Brian Thomas standpoint, the spots I want to see him land on, I come to a type of team that where he doesn't need to be the immediate wide receiver one. They have like a high quality target earner that plays in the flanker position or the slot position. I think at the Colts with Michael Pittman, the Jags with Christian Kirk as a slot receiver is a high targeted player there, though not as quite as sexy as the Colts example. And then the Cowboys too. I think if the Cowboys just want to go full, we're going to be irresponsible, let's just take another receiver. We have CeeDee Lamb. He could complement him there as that vertical X receiver. But if you squint at the Bills, Jordan, I think Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel kind of combined can be maybe that one player. And then again, they have Kincaid. So I think he would be he would be a very interesting player in terms of like where he gets drafted in rookie drafts. If let's just say, for example, one of these top 3 receivers gets taken by the Giants, and they land in a spot, or maybe even one of them goes to the Bears, right? And they're not going to lead the team in targets in year 1, most likely. I wonder if Brian Thomas on the Bills, people would be like, I don't know if I would do it. I don't think I would advise it, but I wonder if people would start to think like he gets a big boost being the wide receiver 1 nominally on the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, no, that's where it's going to be the thing where these guys, I saw it last year. Like James Cook got put as receiver a lot. Like Curtis Samuel can line up in the backfield. Like he had a lot of experience at Ohio State in that type of role. Even got a little bit of those reps when McCaffrey was no longer was not healthy with the Joe Brady offense. So again, it's not perfect for the Bills, but Brian Thomas is probably the best option. If they got Romo Dunze, that would be immediate. We're fine. Like they're going to be fine at receiver. Romo Dunze to me is the most disrespected, I think, wide receiver 3 I've seen. Like, I think he's with the Marvin Harrisons and the Malik Neighbors of the world of like, he's that good. It's kind of like Mike Evans, where Mike Evans every single year is unbelievably talented. But then CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, if someone told you that CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase were better than Mike Evans, you'd be like, okay, doesn't mean Mike Evans is less great. It just means he's a little bit lower than those guys.
Yeah, I think people that listen to this pod know how I feel about Roma Dunze, so I'm there with you, if even not one step further on him as a player. But any other parting shots on the Bills, kind of like what they need, what we're thinking here for this? Look, we know receivers a big need, and obviously on our fantasy pod, that's going to be a big discussion point. But it's by far not the only need on this team. And while they do have a lot of picks, they don't have a 3rd rounder, but they have 2 4th rounders and a 2nd rounder to complement their 28th overall selection.
Yeah, I think safety is the biggest need. Like, obviously, when you lose Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, Mike Edwards is a veteran, but he was pretty bad last season. Taylor Rapp wasn't exactly, he was good, but he was a rotational guy for them. So defensively at safety, obviously getting another pass rusher because what's going on with Von Miller is super important. And then I would say center. Like, they're putting Connor McGarvin there. Mitch Morris was the center forever. I don't like that move. I don't think Connor McGarvin's a good center. And in this draft, like, if they don't go receiver in the 1st round, you have Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon, that from the O-line guys that I trust and follow, he looked phenomenal. And at the Senior Bowl, he looked really good as well.
Man, it's going to be funny when the Bills don't touch receiver till the 4th round. Just because we've all talked about it. I doubt that happens, but we've all talked about it. I know the Bills fan base pretty well because I've been on so many Bills shows because of the Steph Diggs stuff, and then like they trade Steph Diggs, they signed Curtis Samuel, so been on attached to a lot of Bills media the last few years. That media group is so, and their fan base is so wide receiver thirsty, even pre Steph Diggs trade. So it's going to be hilarious when they take a safety and an edge rusher, or an offensive lineman and an edge rusher, or an offensive lineman and safety, and then for like day 3 of the draft broadcast start, and they're like, "Is Javon Baker still available? Or can we add Malik Washington to this like little tiny wide receiver group?" It's going to be pretty outrageous when that happens. But let's move on to another top AFC contender here, and let's talk about the Bengals. My central offseason theme for the Bengals is Jordan. I kind of think this is the farewell tour for the original Joe Burrow era Bengals band on offense. Like, a couple of the members have been replaced, right? Again, you think about the farewell tour for your favorite band. Most of the original members are there, and like, it's certainly good enough to think like, yeah, this is close enough, but maybe the bass players cycled out. Tyler Boyd's not back as a slot receiver. Maybe they got a new drummer, right? Joe Mixon's gone. But the highlight members, are still there. Joe Burrow's still there. Jamar Chase is still there. But T. Higgins, he's there now. But again, this might be the farewell tour where next year, like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are the only one playing the coffee shop, circuit, not the arena tours like they used to do. I'm not saying that the Bengals are going to be bad. I'm just trying to complete the analogy here of, I think this is the last era for this particular group on offense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that I do believe that T. Higgins is going to end up playing on the tag. I don't think that they're going to get an extension done and then they're going to move on from him postseason and probably make some sort of trade. Somebody's going to be paying for T. Higgins, especially one of these teams that are drafting a rookie quarterback. I've seen the Giants trading up and getting McCarthy. T. Higgins is a guy that I could see them targeting to pair with Hyatt and Wandale, and just kind of rolling with that type of offense.
I need that.
But as far as this upcoming year, it's the one interesting thing that I've seen is how much do they trust their wide receiver threes that they drafted last year? Like, is Charlie Jones or Andrea Isovas going to step up into that slot role? Or are they going to go more 12 and try to throw Mike Gesicki into the slot? Because that's where that's where he lives. Like, he's not an inline tight end. It's been proven over and over throughout his career. And it's one of those things where I was going to ask you, like, how do you feel about, obviously, Charlie Jones and Andrea? Do you think that the Bengals are going to move away from 11 and go more 12 with Gesicki? Or do you think they're going to be targeting Ricky Pearsall in round 2 to kind of throw into the Tyler Boyd role and also prepare for the post-T. Higgins era?
Yeah, Pearsall's a fun name. I've also thrown out Keon Coleman too, because I think it kind of gives you two, like, you kill two birds with one stone there. Pearsall I like better than Coleman, but Coleman's a guy that I think needs to move into the slot. So he gives you a Tyler Boyd replacement right now. And then again, from a volume standpoint, maybe he can take on T. Higgins' volume, not at the same position, because T. Higgins is a pure outside guy, even more so than Jamar Chase, who gets moved around a little bit. But again, I like Charlie Jones. I liked him as a prospect. I liked him as a slot receiver prospect. He could beat zone coverage. Yoshivas has shown some very brief flashes, right? He's a high caliber athlete, but I just don't want to be in a position, if I'm Cincinnati, where I'm chasing weapons. Really, in any like, you don't want to be the Chargers with Justin Herbert this year, where it's like, and look, they tried, right? They drafted Josh Palmer. They obviously drafted Quentin Johnson in the first round. They drafted Darius Davis, but they're going into a season with a bunch of threes at best, in my opinion, on that depth chart. The Bengals will never be there because they'll have Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow linked up forever, but I don't want to be kind of cobbling things together in the post T. Higgins era. So as much as I liked some of the flashes of those guys, to me, I'm trying to get ahead of this. And they have 3 picks on day 2. They have the 49th overall pick in round 2 and the 80th overall and 97th overall pick. So if I'm Cincinnati, Jordan, I'm earmarking one of those picks for I would say wide out, but just somebody with WR next to their name.
Yeah, this receivers class, again, I've seen some of the stuff you've posted. Like, if Ricky Pearsall ended up on the Bengals, I'd be taking him in every draft, hoping that he could be their 2 next year. I think he's, again, the comparison sounds tough, but the play style is Cooper Kupp. Like, he's just so good at separating, ball tracking, understanding zone coverages. It's just, he didn't play with great quarterback play. And when he was at Arizona State, he was behind Brandon Ayuk. And, like, that's fair.
No shame in that.
Yeah, like you walk in and it's Brandon Ayuk and Rashad White are getting 300 touches a year. Okay, I'm not going to perform in this. And then Jaden Daniels was there, but then he transferred because the offense and stuff was tough. But again, with this Bengals team, like, yeah, I would be taking a receiver. It's just going to be, what role are you looking for? Because there's so many. Like, you've talked about Coleman moving inside. You got just guys that are pure slots like a Malik Washington, or honestly, I love Malachi Corley. I got the chance to see him at the Senior Bowl. He would be more of the 80 to 97 range of picks for me. But Malachi Corley, Matt, this dude's arms are the biggest arms I've ever seen on a receiver. It doesn't make, like, he is a muscle. He looks like Doug Martin, like, physically. And then there was a few plays they ran during the practices where it was like, goal line red zone type usage. And he came over and he's like, did you guys see how many pancakes I had? Because he was just throwing defensive backs. Like, he just runs through people, and good enough for me to be able to see that in person. Because on top of it, I got to see him be a route runner a little bit. Like, he has a lot more wiggle than Western Kentucky displayed. It was, the screen game, just giving him the ball and space as much as possible. But at the Senior Bowl, he was running with some fluidity in his routes that I'm like, okay, I'm encouraged to see you be a slot at the next level. But for me, the Bengals, next thing I would say is they need to develop their talent on defense. They keep drafting guys in these back end of the first rounds from Michigan with DJ Turner and Dax Hill, and they drafted Jordan Battle. But then they brought back, they signed Geno Stone and brought in Von Bell. It's like, you guys just spent a first and a second on 2 safeties when your offense line wasn't exactly the best. Obviously, they're patchworking it with Trent Brown and Orlando Brown, but like you drafted these guys and now you're paying the position with free agency. That screams like red flag all over to me for the Cincinnati Bengals just drafting right now. I don't know where they're going to go. Everybody's kind of like the Bengals taking a receiver in the first round. I don't see that. Like since they kept T. Higgins, they haven't traded him to this point. I can't imagine they're taking a receiver at 18 overall.
No, that's a really good point about their draft history of late. Because like even they took Miles Murphy at 28th overall last year, and it's like, okay, I mean, we probably need to see a little bit more there. You look at the year prior to that, Dax Hill, you mentioned, Cam Taylor-Britt. They need some of these guys to like hit. Like if you're going to pay Joe Burrow and you're going to pay Jamar Chase, which they have and they will, you need to start hit. And unless you're just going to be a bad defense and like, dude, I like Lou Anarumo as a defensive coordinator, but he was just kind of in hell last year trying to put this stuff together with a really bad spine. And like that spine of the defense was so critical. But like, all right, well, we can't pay Jesse Bates because we're paying the offense and we still are trying to find offensive linemen. Well, then you need your safeties to hit. You need these other secondary pass rushers beyond Trey Hendrickson to hit. And like, I do think the Bengals have been like quietly swinging and missing on some of these defensive positions, which is tough because you need to get like rookie contract talent on that side of the ball. But now, especially because now the offense is starting to come down a little bit with the future T. Higgins stuff. I don't know. They're quietly a very fascinating team to look at in the draft this year.
Yeah, they're 1 year away from being similar to where the Bills are. Because once you pay the quarterback, it just gets very difficult if you're not hitting. And like, everybody looks at the Kansas City Chiefs and they're like, oh, they paid rookie Rashee Rice. I'm like, they have Travis Kelce on the most team-friendly contract ever because of the way we treat the tight end position financially. Like, Travis Kelce's worth the $25 million that Devonta Smith's getting, but he's getting, what, 16, 15, if that? And then on top of it, the Chiefs hit L'Jarius Sneed.
Right.
They hit Trent McDuffie. They hit George Karlaftis. Like, they didn't miss. And those are the picks that won them the Super Bowl. Like Patrick Mahomes, obviously, yes, it makes everything a lot easier when you have a quarterback that's down 21 and he doesn't care. But it also helps when you have two corners that lock up Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel in the Super Bowl. Like, makes everything a little bit easier on that side of the ball.
Yeah, that's the thing I think that's different. Of course, the Mahomes factor for sure, but if you compare the Bengals, and look, Joe Burrow wasn't healthy last year. If Joe Burrow was healthy last year, maybe we just start having a very different conversation. Maybe they're not picking an 18th overall. Let's put it that way. Even though Jake Browning did some good stuff for them, it just, when you miss on those picks, it can become problematic, especially once you get to a point where now we're kind of raising questions about the offense, right? And so I'm very fascinated to see where they go in this year's draft. I do think there's a chance that at any of those picks, 18, 49, 80, 97, we could certainly be looking at least one, maybe two, like true fantasy difference makers, because they need help at receiver, because of the tight end positions. Like, okay, they have Mike Gesicki and they brought back Tanner Hudson, but maybe they take. I think they'd be a team to consider Brock Bowers if you fell to 18, although I don't see that happening.
Yeah, no, Brock Bowers is different. As a college football fan that's watched him since he had 100 yards against Bama as a 17 or 18-year-old. Yeah, no, that
Insane.
guy, it's just, he should be a top 10 pick. I don't care that he plays tight end, but guess what? You don't have to pay tight ends because of the way that contracts work. I know everybody sees the Eric Ebrons and, TJ Hawkinson to an extent and like are scared. I'm not afraid of Brock Bowers. He's going to be an unbelievable player. All
right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, let's finish up with the three other teams in this episode of Teams That Will Shape the Draft after this. All right, we're back. Green Bay Packers time, Jordan. My central theme for this team is it's time to go. Okay? It's time to go. It's time to win. And I don't know that we're going to be able to sit here and have like a conversation about a fantasy relevant player being drafted on this team, right? No. Because like I hear some people say like, well, could this group of the receivers really need a one? I think that Jaden Reed could be that guy. I really like Dontavian Wicks as a route runner, but like it's a deep receiver room. Romeo Doubs is like probably their fourth best guy from a talent perspective, and he was the best one of these guys, at least most productive player in the playoffs. Like that room is good. The tight end room is good. The running back room they just invested in with Josh Jacobs. Maybe they could try to upgrade on A.J. Dillon as the backup, but like this team right now around Jordan Love and the skill position players is set up to go. So it's time to go. So with that in mind, Jordan, what does this team that has a boatload of picks, I mean, just a ton on day 3, and they have the 25th overall pick, they have 2 second rounders and 2 third rounders. What does this team need to do to take the next step?
For starters, they just need to keep to their drafting method of drafting guys from the Senior Bowl. In their last 2 drafts, they've picked 7 players from the Senior Bowl. That's Christian Watson, that's Jaden Reed, that's Romeo Doubs, that's Dontavian Wicks. Obviously, it's receiver position, but this Senior Bowl, there was a lot of really good interior offensive linemen at the draft, or the Senior Bowl. There was a lot of defensive backs like Quinyon Mitchell being there. They just need to get players that are going to be impactful. They got a new defensive coordinator in Jeff Hafley. They're going to be reversing from their old method of kind of playing and letting people attack underneath. They're probably going to come after teams. They're probably going to try to be more physical against the run, because you look at the 49ers and you look at the Lions. 2 teams that their run games are explosive and very, very difficult to defend. The Packers, from a talent perspective, like they've got the pieces up front to be one of the best, defenses in the league. They just haven't had them all healthy at the same time. So it's just drafting impactful players. That could mean trading out of the first round and accumulating more picks, because towards the end of the first, it's usually a lot of day 2 picks that sneak into this round, and teams start drafting a little bit more for need there. So if they stay, I think Cooper DeJean is the one that's obvious.
Yeah.
He fits. He can play safety. He can play corner. He's one of the more talented players. Obviously, I know you deal with Andy in the Iowa talk, but as a fan, he was their best player. He was their best offensive player too. That's great. Their punter and him were the 2 best players on offense over at Iowa, which is pretty sad to say the least. But then you got Quinyon Mitchell, who, watching him at the Senior Bowl, unbelievable.
He's like a stud. Yeah.
He put Roman Wilson in the seatbelt. He put any receiver that was at the Senior Bowl during his practices were getting locked up by him. And I was like, okay, that guy, first round pick, should be. He's my corner one, because I think he's one of the few corners that play true man coverage and just you're not going anywhere type of cornerbacks. Like Sharon Arnold's really smart. Mm-hmm. Kool-Aid McKinstry has the coolest name. But as a cornerback, like I'm taking Quinyon there, and it's that, and then just improving the interior offensive line. They lost some pieces, and some of the pieces that they played weren't exactly that good. So cornerback and interior O-line are where I think the Packers go.
Yeah, and like that interior offensive line, I think is a really critical spot to look at. And I mean, they lost guys in free agency, right? Like they lost players at different levels of it, and I think that is really what could help take this offense to the next level. Like I think that's probably the answer there in terms of the offensive side of the football, because they're good at the skill position spots. Like we said, they're so good. They're so deep at the pass catcher spot in particular. And then I do like what Josh Jacobs brings to them from a running back standpoint. Honestly, like they might not need to take a step on offense, Jordan. It might just be this defensive transition is what they need to sort of get them into the big boy tier of the NFC, because my God, like it's not been fun from a defensive perspective there with Joe Barry calling the shots. I think this is that is going to be a really fascinating transition to watch Packers defense moving on from Joe Barry into a new era.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing is if they trade out of the first round, Peyton Wilson from NC State, Senior Bowl guy, a linebacker, it's not a premium position, which is whatever. I look at the Ravens and 49ers, and they paid their linebackers, and they're pretty good. And also the Chiefs invested in the linebacker position. So Peyton Wilson to replace Devondre Campbell as an off-ball guy and pair with Quay Walker would be excellent. Like they're in a beautiful spot, because you talked about the receiver depth. Like even Bo Milton was productive when he got on the field.
Yeah.
It was just crazy how Matt LaFleur just gets these guys to be in good roles. And like they didn't have Christian Watson. He's supposed to be their number one based on his physical tool set. He needs to get his hamstring worked out. And then if he's back to full strength, they're going to rotate receiver and still be excellent on offense.
Yeah, 2 things. One, I still wouldn't rule out at somewhere along the way, some point they add to this receiver room. Yeah. Like they throw one more guy in there, not just because that's what they do. And because of the Christian Watson factor, I do think, I appreciate what I appreciate what Bo Melton did last year, but at the same time, like, I think you maybe want to just throw a 4th rounder at that thing and see what happens. You might land on yourself on another Dontavian Wicks, who was awesome as a rookie, and I think is going to be a really, really good player for them. Just because of the Christian Watson thing, I do think that's a wise course of action. But man, Jordan, I just can't help but thinking that room, if everybody's healthy and out there, is just going to, one, be a problem for NFL teams and be a freaking problem for fantasy managers, bro. Like, how is that room going to sort itself out? I'm the receiver guy, and you do great work with receivers too. I have no idea how that is supposed to sort out from a target distribution standpoint.
It's going to be similar to like the 49ers, I think, from not so heavy into the run game, but from the fact of like, how does this team struggle? This is what we're doing. Like, I remember Brandon Ayuk against like single eye, cover 3, cover 1, dominant. Deebo Samuel against any 2 high shell, he is just figuring it out. So like when they played Seattle, I went Deebo Samuel because they ran a lot of 2 high shell last year. And then when they played the Buccaneers and, Todd Bowles just coming after things, cover 1, cover 3, slam Brandon Ayuk. So for this, gonna be that way. It's just, I have no idea where any of these guys actually, like, where Jordan Love leans on any of these guys, because they haven't really played together. It felt like one went down, another one came in, and
there's like 4, like in an ideal world, there's 4 of them, not 2 of them. So I think that makes it even more like, okay, great. There's this in a ceiling scenario. Deebo Samuel can get 11 to 12 targets, or in a ceiling scenario, Brandon Ayuk can get 11, 12, 13 targets, something like that. But because there's 4 of these guys, it's like, all right, well, in a ceiling scenario, maybe we get 7 targets out of Christian Watson, which those could be high yield targets. Maybe in a ceiling scenario, we get Dontavian Wicks with 7 targets. But like, I just feel like Romeo Doubs is going to be just very disrespecting this conversation, because he's not the difference maker. I think these other 3 guys can really be difference makers in certain scenarios, but there's going to be weeks when he gets like 7 to 8 targets, something like that. So it just seems like it's going to be a mess.
Oh, it's definitely going to be a mess. I'm excited for it. As a fan of Dontavian Wicks, I wanted Carolina to take him last year. I actually had him ahead of Jonathan Mingo, so I'm happy that Dontavian Wicks is good. Very sad that Carolina can't have that on their roster.
Yeah, well, it would be nice if the one position where Jonathan Mingo could play wasn't wasn't being held down by like a 34-year-old veteran. But unfortunately, not very good planning by your boy Scott Fitterer and Frank Reich and the guys there. So too many cooks in the kitchen. Not a good situation with Carolina last year. But I'll tell you what is a good situation. The situation that the LA Rams find themselves in right now. My central offseason theme for the Rams is it's time for Rams Stafford 2.0 to take the next step. We saw the initial version of 2.0 last year be much better than people expected. We got, great performances out of these kind of unheralded players like Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams. Shoot, even Demarcus Robinson starting to give him some moments by the end of the year as a reserve wide receiver. Now it's kind of time, I think, for that next group to crystallize. I will just say this, because I have been thinking about it all offseason, Jordan, where, hey, the Rams are making a first-round pick for the first time in the Sean McVay era. They are, which is crazy to say because he's been there for a minute. They're going to make their first-round pick in the Sean McVay era, and they have a lot of picks. They're loaded with day 3 picks. They also have 2 third-rounders in addition to the 52nd overall pick in the second round. I have just been thinking they're going to just hammer defense, right? Because the offense, theoretically, looks pretty good on paper. Invested in the offensive line. Kyron Williams coming off a nice season. They have Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp. Hopefully he's healthy this offseason. Tight end, maybe they could use a player there. Like Matt Stafford is ready and rocking at quarterback. But then to bring up the Peter Schrager mock again, he said, I don't know if you know this, but people out there, I know Jordan knows this. Peter Schrager and Sean McVay are boys, okay? They hosted a podcast together on the frickin' ringer.com at one point, all right? So they're pals. They're bros. Schrager wrote in his mock draft, quote, I'll go on record with something of a guarantee here. If the Rams do not trade back, you better believe Sean McVay's first ever first-round selection will be an offensive player. Now, he had that as an offensive lineman. So, again, if we're talking fantasy skill position players, blah, 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 he had the 9th overall pick being Tyler Guyton, offensive tackle out of Oklahoma. But still, this is now maybe reconfiguring the conversation I wanted to have about the Rams here. Because again, to me, I thought it was attack the defense, right? But could we be looking at it like an offensive player infused somewhere on this team? Maybe even at 19th overall, at least according to Schrager. Something of a guarantee, he says.
I would say yes. And the player I would expect, if they offensive line, they can always pick. That's, makes sense. I feel like their offensive line was very good and has been growing together. Maybe the continuity shouldn't be attacked or, displaced. But how could you look at Xavier Worthy's 4-2 and knowing, I think Josh McDaniel, put him with Cooper Kupp and Puka? Like, talk about the space he's going to create in that motion. Like, Sean McVay looking at that with Mike McDaniel behind him. Like, I don't know, like this whole tree where the whole entire Washington Commanders group with Slowick and McVay, and I feel like they all want to go after some of the same type of players because it's just who they are. They drafted Tutu Atwell. Like, they wanted that. They wanted the guy that is the 4.3 speed and just electric down the field to give for Stafford. You add Xavier Worthy into that group because it just doesn't matter what they do motion-wise, and you give him some of the work ethic that Cooper Kupp and Puka obviously displayed to get where they're at. That type of offense would be terrifying. I don't know how to defend it. It would be similar to the way that Miami is, and it's like you just got to hope that Tua or Stafford kind of have a bad day, or you can beat them up on the O-line. But that offense with Xavier Worthy just causing chaos pre-snap for Puka and Cooper Kupp to just get leverage because people have to communicate. It's one of those picks that I would see if they decided to stay at that pick.
Dude, you just melted my face off with this. Like I don't have a face anymore because of what you just said. And here's the thing, like they got Tutu Atwell for the first time in his career kind of working on those plays a little bit last year. But you take Xavier Worthy and you put him in that position, I think you're maybe 2xing your value of those plays because I'm just obsessed with this idea of this coaching tree in particular, like kind of evolving their pre-snap motion plays. And to me, you see that Green Bay is the perfect example. And I've probably brought this up on the show before, but they had finally figured this out last night after looking it up because I know I've been talking about it on other shows before. They had like Tyler Ervin as a running back on these pre-snap motion plays, like little eye candy. And then when Ervin didn't really work out, he had like 50 targets in a season one time. But again, he's like a running back, like a small running back. They also used Aaron Jones at times, and they're like, all right, we need to get a real receiver on this. Let's draft Amari Rodgers. Well, Amari Rodgers is not that good, okay? So like that was not a great draft pick at the time, but it was clearly the player they were like looking for, that like type of player. Then they get Jaden Reed on those plays last year, and like, oh boy, now we've got a real receiver who's explosive on the end of these pre-snap motion plays. Like, we're going to work, okay? So that, I think, is certainly what the Rams are looking for. And I had not considered Xavier Worthy as an option for them. I do think they need more receiver depth because Demarcus Robinson, good stuff for them last year, but he's Demarcus Robinson, and Cooper Kupp is old at this point. He's got injuries at this point. Like, he's definitely a health risk. So I've been thinking like, yeah, they need receiver depth, but you've got my gears turning on this Xavier Worthy thing. So I'm going to ask you your opinion about Xavier Worthy as a player. Like, how much of a real wide receiver is he beyond just like the speed and what he could bring on these pre-snap motion plays?
So for starters, watching Texas film is so tough because Quinn Ewers has been so inaccurate. It's just like everybody points to AD Mitchell's production, and I can't stand it. I don't really engage into that just because AD Mitchell's a very, very talented receiver. Does he take plays off occasionally? Cool. Yeah. It's probably because he's frustrated with the quarterback playing. I don't.
So does Xavier Worthy too. The whole team does it.
Yeah. Because it's just, it would be beyond frustrating. Like, watch Xavier Worthy as a true freshman. When I watched him at Texas that year, his true freshman season, obviously when you're a true freshman, just the energy level's a little different when you get on the field and stuff. That dude was electric. Before he ran the 4.2, I comped him to like just a lighter Brandon Cooks when he was at Oregon State, just after the catch, what he does. Obviously, he is skinnier. He's not going to break as many tackles, but the way he changes defenders' angles is insane, and he's capable of getting in and out of his breaks smoothly, not top tier, not like a Tyreek Hill with a 4.2 speed, but it's good enough where he's a real receiver. He plays the receiver position very well. It was difficult at Texas because of just quarterback play. And I will say one thing I love about the Texas receivers is Steve Sarkisian called plays. Steve Sarkisian is a very, very good play caller. He showed a lot of the NFL teams the blueprint for these guys. And then going forward, you can kind of project, like, is he going to be a fantasy dominant player? Probably not. Puka should get a majority, and so would Cooper Kupp in this scenario. But as a skill set, like, Hollywood Brown is very useful when he's on the field. Like, Brandon Cooks has been very useful every year that he's been in the league. It's some of that style where this guy's going to get, I would say, profile, maybe not in the Rams, but normally like 115 targets would be ideal. Getting him 60 to 70 catches. Obviously, a lot of it down the field. But even at his size, he's fine taking a screen. Like, he's electric. He makes people miss with his speed. I mean, he's not afraid to get hit, but he knows how to change defenders' angles. But the one thing that I would say to push back on receiver talk for the Rams is you got to find a way to do something with the defensive line. Like, you lost Aaron Donald. And I pulled a stat that I wanted to give you here. When Aaron Donald was off the field, quarterbacks completed 71% of their passes. When he was on the field, that number was 58%. That's a 13% decrease when he came on the field, just pressuring, just making an impact. On top of it, their pressure rate decreased by 14% when he came off the field. Obviously, we know Aaron Donald, Hall of Famer, one of the best players that I've ever watched on the defensive side of the ball. Unbelievable. There's no Aaron Donald in this draft. There's probably not going to be one for a while. But just because you're not going to replace him one for one, you got to find a guy. And this draft, they're going to be able to probably take their number one defensive tackle at that specific pick, because I don't see the D tackle going before the 19 overall pick.
Yeah, listen, I think there's some wisdom to, we're not going to replace Aaron Donald, so like let's just load up on offense, and like that's where that Xavier Worthy thing does really intrigue me. And by the way, like I don't have a first round grade on Xavier Worthy. I have like a priority second round pick grade on Xavier Worthy. But if a team like the Rams drafts him, because I think they'll get the most use out of him for all the reasons we just said, like that's where we talk about that post draft analysis. I'm going to feel very differently about him as a player if he goes to there as opposed to he goes to, you know, the damn Patriots or something like that. Okay, so like it just, that's where landing spot really matters. But I'm with you that they're in a great spot, really, because I could see them just, again, loading up on offense, getting playmakers, and like, let's make this unit as good as it could be in the last kind of Matthew Stafford push here.
Yep.
Or I can see like, hey, we're still pretty blank slatey on defense. Let's take some positions there and just try to get that thing moving a little bit here. So I like your kind of both scenarios that you outline here. The we'll call it the sex appeal pick of the Xavier Worthy, and then we'll just call it maybe the sober pick of like defense here. And like I said, they're pretty well loaded at just in terms of draft picks, but yeah, I don't know. I felt like I had a pretty clear vision with the Rams, and then this Peter Schrager mock draft guarantee is definitely got me thinking here.
No, yeah, no. And I saw that they were taking, and I did see the offense part, and I was like, wait a minute, that's where my wheels turned into maybe an offense line. He's throwing a curveball. They're taking Xavier Worthy right ahead of Mike McDaniel. Like, that's the other just added pick. Like, in my head, like I feel like we're gonna see a draft clip of the Dolphins, like him freaking out about it. Because like, yeah, like Mike McDaniel's hilarious.
Dude, I'm with you on that. This is the scheme that that Xavier Worthy needs to land in, and like he would obviously be awesome in Miami. But Miami, it's like, grow up, dude. Okay, you have enough speed. Like, stop eating candy. Eat your fucking meat and potatoes, okay? Like, grow up and eat your vegetables, all right? No more candy. You've got enough of that. Eat some real nutritional value, all right? Like, get an offensive lineman. You're not the Rams. You haven't like paid a quality offensive line. If the Dolphins take Xavier Worthy, I'm like, okay, like we're jumping the shark here on the bit. True. Like, give me a break.
I mean, hey, wouldn't you want Jalen Waddle to be your slowest receiver?
That
sounds cool.
I guess. They'll lose in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs again. All right.
Yeah,
So that'll be what it gets them. But I'm being somewhat facetious, but like 90% serious. Anyways, okay. Final team here that has 10 plus picks in the draft. Again, we'll hit on the Cardinals very briefly at the end of the episode, but 49ers, my central theme for them this offseason is just, hey, we're making another run at a Super Bowl, baby. Okay. So they're another team that in theory, if Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel are both on the roster, they don't really have a need for a playmaker. Okay, they're not like these teams like the Bills and Bengals where we talked about. Maybe they do need to think about the future of the receiver position. Again, to bring up the Schrager mock, he had them taking a receiver in the first round. Actually, Lad McConkey. I'd be interested to see if they would do that if Ayuk and Samuel are still on the roster and what that would do in rookie drafts if that was to happen. But for the most part, this is a team that needs to beef up the trenches on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, no, for the 49ers, like, they need a right guard. Like, they had John Feliciano as their right guard this past season. Obviously, he comes over from New York, and they got a lot out of him because Trent Williams exists. But for me, I think this is a spot where what the Dolphins did with, like, Laramie Tunsil. Like, this draft class is loaded at tackle, so you're going to be able to get a very quality one, and you don't have to play him at tackle right away with Trent Williams and Colton Mikovits starting there. You could throw him inside, put him in the guard spot, have him learn as much as he possibly can from Trent Williams, because that's the guy that post Trent Williams will be a very interesting 49ers roster, because what he allows them to do offensively is crazy. Like, just the pulling, he's just a Hall of Fame left tackle, and he's still doing it at 35 or 36. So for them, the guard position, I think, is the biggest need. They I think they upgraded on the edge over Chase Young personally, just because what Chase Young was in the playoffs was the Packers picked on him. Like, they should have won that game because Chase Young was just not defending the run, and Dontavian Wicks was just bullying him. Like, receivers were blocking him. And Leonard Floyd, Yader Gross-Matos, you got guys who could rotate that aren't going to give you necessarily huge sack production, but will be enough to help Bosa. The trade for Malik Collins was awesome. Getting Devondre Campbell to mitigate the loss of Dre Greenlaw was incredible. They need, obviously, corner. I feel like they've always needed corner.
They always have a need on, like, corner across from Ward.
Yeah, like they had Richard Sherman back like the first Super Bowl, and it's just like, that can't be the only corner they have. They needed someone else, and it just kind of always comes down to the cornerback position with them. Huafunga will be back, which will be huge for their safety position. There's just a lot of safeties that could go in that spot. But, like, yeah, you're right. They're kicking up for another Super Bowl run. They're unbelievably talented. And one thing I will say about the Brandon Ayuk saga that's going on here, didn't we do this with Deebo? Like, Deebo was unhappy and met with them and looked frustrated at a dinner, and he's doing this and that, and then they just paid him. Like, I don't think Brandon Ayuk's off this roster. Kyle Shanahan, I think, loves Ayuk personally. Like, just knows he's a great receiver and has gotten it to that point where he should be paid like one. It's just they haven't been able to agree on terms yet. And obviously Devonta Smith getting paid really hurts that type of deal.
Yeah, I definitely think they're kind of headed for a salary squeeze with Kittle and Samuel and the contracts that they're on. And if they add an Ayuk thing here, but, like, if they get Ayuk, like, they could get Ayuk's cap number down this year with an extension. Like, that is very possible. I just think it's just always funny with players. Like, they're not in a rush to get this done. Like, what's the rush for them to do it right now other than to make the player happy, which, I mean, yeah, like, it's good to do that, but just from a deadline standpoint, they're not like the Cowboys up against a weird deadline, but they're also, like, not in that same sort of territory. So it's just interesting with the Ayuk stuff, because I'm with you, man. Like, think about all the work Shanahan put in to develop this guy specifically. Like, this guy was in the doghouse at one point, man. He was, like, getting driven hard because he wasn't, practicing at the level that he wanted. The blocking wasn't there. Now this guy is one of the best blocking receivers in the league and one of the best route running receivers in the league because of that work and development that was put in. It would make no sense, and I would be the first one on the firing line, to kill them for this move. If they trade him, especially for some of the draft picks that you see come up, like people are like, oh, well, maybe the Commanders can send one of their early second round picks because Adam Peters is the GM's like, are you out of your mind? You think that's going to get, if that gets Brandon Ayuk traded, like fans should riot outside the stadium. Like, what are we talking about here? So I'm with you. I do think it makes no sense really to trade Ayuk with all of the work they've put into the player. That's just kind of my general stance there. Overall, I think this team needs work in the trenches, and I'm glad you brought up like the Trent Williams of it all, because this has come up on a few mock draft Monday episodes on the pod where I'm really interested if they can get somebody who is a day one like impact player on the offensive line and then kind of an eventual replacement for Trent Williams, because he is so critical to what they do on offense, even if he doesn't play a fantasy relevant position.
Yeah, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma would be the name that I think would be linked most. I believe, I could be wrong, I believe I saw during the Senior Bowl that Trent Williams was a part of like one of the guys that he was working out with. He's an Oklahoma kid as well.
Yep.
And I watched a lot of Oklahoma football because of Jeff Lebby and that offense I love. And he was phenomenal blocker. And for his height and weight, he looks like kind of the way that I feel like all Oklahoma tackles look, where they're just shredded. Like they're not a big offensive lineman. Like they're just actually in shape, but they just weigh 300 plus pounds.
It is worth noting too, they could be a trade down team from 31 overall because they are loaded with picks, but it's mostly on day 3. Like they have 3 fourth rounders, but they only have 1 pick in the second and third round. So if some team wants to come up for a quarterback, or some team like, I brought up the Commanders. I think they're an option to maybe trade back in the first round to get a tackle here. You get the quarterback early. You use some of this extra capital to get a tackle. That's an interesting idea there. There's some front office familiarity there with Adam Peters coming, the GM for the Commanders coming from San Francisco. So easy call and communication there. Sometimes that stuff can be overrated, but it's a possible option. Anyways, I do think they're an option to trade down there from 31 as well. But all right, Jordan, I just want to get your thoughts briefly on the Cardinals, because like I said, we did break them down in a previous episode, but they're a fascinating team to talk about, and they do fit this exercise as well because they are definitely loaded with draft picks. If I put you, kind of on the spot here, give me your prediction for what happens with the Cardinals in the first round from a trade down, trade back up perspective, what position they're looking at. The world is kind of their oyster, but you, Jordan Vanek, get to make the decision here for the Cardinals. Where are you going?
I think they trade back with Minnesota and then trade up for Odunze with the Bears. Nice, because the Bears want to move back to get the defensive end. I don't think they could sell to their fan base. We passed on Odunze, but they need more picks because obviously they only have, I think they have like 4 picks in total right now, or 5. So I think the Cardinals get the 2 first from Minnesota and then use, one of their day 2 picks and the Minnesota pick to move up with the Bears, give some capital there, and then find themselves to Odunze. Because one thing about, obviously, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, phenomenal. They ran their offense through Trey McBride efficiently. And if you added Odunze with Michael Wilson, 2 big-bodied dudes, they brought back Greg Dortch. He could play the slot. That's fine. But on top of it, like, they can run their offense very effectively with those 2 and Trey McBride just rotating targets just through those 3. I think Michael Wilson will be a receiver that surprises people because I think the developmental side of him is going to showcase next year, because I liked a lot of things that I saw from him. It was just tough with Kyler coming off the ACL, Josh Dobbs. Like, it was a difficult season for the Arizona Cardinals, but they need a lot of things, and getting the 2 first round picks from the Vikings should be where they start.
Yeah, they need a lot of things. Like this, the defense is pretty bare bones, but I like this vision of Rome Odunze as their ex-receiver, because Michael Wilson, I'm with you that I think he showed real flashes as a rookie, and I kind of thought he'd be a pure outside receiver based on scouting him at Stanford, but they did use him off the ball. They used him in the slot a little bit as kind of like a big slot receiver, which I think if you're thinking about running the ball, like you want Michael Wilson and his size in there as opposed to Greg Dortch and his size if you're running the ball out of 11 personnel packages. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I can see where that receiver room comes together around Rome Odunze, who I think at his peak is a guy you can funnel the offense through, but they have a legit target earner in Trey McBride there. That potential like 3 receiver set with McBride, you could put defenses in a bind there with Kyler Murray and at least get him kind of like back on track in terms of his career. Well, Jordan, this was awesome. Appreciate you, buddy. This was a very, jam-packed episode. We talked about a ton of teams, talked about a ton of players, got to so many topics. Appreciate you doing it. Tell the people out there what you've got working on as we're heading into the draft season and heading into the 2024 NFL season.
So for now, you'll see a lot of my work with Rotogrinders for the college football season. I'll be breaking down a lot of the DFS plays for college football. I'm going to be posting some depth charts, some graphs where it's like single high coverage from a lot of these college football teams. And as we get to the draft, I'm going to try to go out and put some wide receiver analysis as these picks are coming through and seeing where these guys are landing and why I think these teams are going to be taking these players. And on top of it, like you said earlier, it's way better to talk about it post-draft once we know draft capital and we know where they are than telling, hey, this guy's good at X, Y, and Z until we actually know if he's going to be doing these things. Because I think one of the biggest flaws in receiver analysis is trying to focus on what these players can't do instead of focusing like, what are they and how does that work with this specific team?
Well, if you listen to this show and you follow my work, you know I basically feel the exact same way with what Jordan just made clear there. Well, again, Jordan, appreciate you, buddy. It was awesome. Great show. That is going to do it for us today. We're going to be back on Thursday with Charles McDonald to wrap up our prospect preview series. We're going to review the tight ends, sort of mostly just one tight end, and the top offensive line prospects in this year's class. Until then, we're out.